It was a day like any other, or so I thought. After a long shift at work, I drove home, feeling the usual exhaustion but looking forward to the quiet comfort of my house. My wife, Emma, would likely be there, maybe already making dinner or watching TV in the living room. The routine was familiar, something I had come to rely on, especially during stressful days. As I pulled up to the driveway, nothing seemed out of place. The same trees lined the yard. The porch light flickered gently in the twilight. But something felt off. I couldn't explain it, just a strange feeling creeping in the back of my mind. Maybe it was just the stress of the day. I brushed it off and walked up to the door, fumbling with my keys. When I opened the door, that familiar scent of home greeted me, but something else hit me too: shoes. Not mine, not Emma's, but a pair of men's shoes. They were just sitting there, right by the entrance, like they belonged. My heart skipped a beat. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe we had visitors? My brother, a friend, someone I just hadn't thought to ask about. But the unsettling feeling lingered as I stepped further into the house, my stomach tightening with every step. I called out, "Emma?" My voice echoed through the hall, but no response came. The house was unusually quiet, too quiet. Then I saw it. A shirt. No, a man's shirt, crumpled on the floor leading toward the living room. My chest felt tight, a sickening pit growing in my stomach. I could hear muffled sounds now, from upstairs. My brain went into overdrive, trying to make sense of it, trying to justify what I was seeing. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. I stared at that shirt for what felt like an eternity, trying to will it into making sense. But no amount of mental gymnastics could explain away what I was seeing. Slowly, I picked it up. It was a button-down, not mine, and certainly not Emma's. The fabric was warm, like it had only recently been discarded. A dull, thudding sound echoed in my ears, and I realized it was my heartbeat. I took a step forward, then another, following the trail of scattered clothing. A belt draped over the back of the couch, a pair of jeans tossed carelessly near the foot of the stairs. This wasn't an accident. Someone was here, in my house, with my wife. My hand trembled as I placed it on the banister, staring up the stairs. The muffled sounds I had heard earlier were clearer now. Voices. Low, intimate murmurs, then a soft laugh. Emma's laugh. That sound, which had once brought me joy, now felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts tumbling over each other. Could I be wrong? Maybe it was just a friend? But deep down, I knew. I had known since I saw those shoes. I just didn't want to admit it. With each step I took up the stairs, my breath grew shallower, my vision narrowing as if my body was preparing itself for the inevitable. Halfway up, I froze, suddenly unsure if I could face what I was about to see. Part of me wanted to turn back, to pretend none of this was real, but I couldn't. I had to know. At the top of the stairs, the door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the darkened hallway. The voices were louder now, and unmistakable. My wife's voice and his. I still couldn't place the second voice, but I didn't care. It didn't matter. I knew what it meant. I stood there, my hand hovering above the doorknob, my heart pounding in my ears so loudly that it drowned out everything else. This was it. This was the moment everything changed and my hand finally connected with the doorknob. I hesitated for a second, my entire world hanging by a thread, knowing that whatever lay beyond this door would destroy it. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The scene in front of me hit like a punch to the gut. There, in our bed, tangled in the sheets, was Emma. My Emma, with another man. The room was dimly lit, but it didn't matter. I could see everything, feel everything. Emma's eyes widened when she saw me, her expression flipping from shock to panic in an instant. She scrambled to cover herself, as if that could somehow erase what I had just walked in on. The man, he looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place him in the haze of anger and betrayal clouding my mind. Sat up quickly, reaching for his pants. He didn't say a word, didn't apologize or try to explain. There was a brief moment of silence, where the only sound was my ragged breathing. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight. Words caught somewhere between disbelief and pure rage. "Tom, I can explain," Emma stammered, her voice trembling, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to listen to whatever excuse she could come up with, because there was no explanation that could undo this moment. No explanation that could change the fact that she had betrayed me in the worst possible way, in our home, in our bed. What? What the hell is this, Emma? I finally managed, my voice hoarse. I didn't recognize myself. It was like I was watching from the outside, detached, trying to make sense of the absurdity unfolding in front of me. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to break everything in the room, but I just stood there, frozen in place. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes darted between me and the man, who was now awkwardly trying to pull his clothes back on. He had the decency to avoid eye contact, as if he knew that no amount of words could fix this. I couldn't stand it anymore. The sight of her, of them, was suffocating. Without another word, I turned on my heel and left the room, slamming the door behind me so hard the walls shook. I stormed down the stairs, every step fueled by an overwhelming mixture of anger, pain, and confusion. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I reached the front door, yanked it open, and stepped out into the cool night air. I stood there, just outside the house, staring at the sky. I had to remind myself to breathe, my chest heaving as I fought back the urge to scream. My world had just collapsed in the span of a few minutes, and I had no idea what to do next. I stood outside for what felt like an eternity, my breath uneven, chest tight, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The cold night air nipped at my skin, but I barely felt it. All I could think about was the image of them together, seared into my mind like a burn I couldn't escape. I ran my hands through my hair, tugging at it in frustration, trying to ground myself in the present. My entire life had just been ripped apart in an instant, and the worst part? I hadn't even seen it coming. Sure, we'd had our problems. What couple doesn't? But I never imagined she could do something like this. Not Emma. I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, yell until my voice gave out. But I was too broken to even start. I had thought I knew her, thought I knew us. And now, standing on the edge of my own home, I realized I had no idea what had been going on behind my back. Was it just this guy? Or were there others? How long had this been happening? My mind spiraled, each new question worse than the last, and I felt myself sinking deeper into a black hole of anger and despair. The front door creaked open behind me, and I heard her tentative footsteps as she stepped out onto the porch. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, a few feet away, like she was afraid to come closer. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I looked at her, I might break. "Tom," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, let's talk about this." Talk? My blood boiled at the suggestion. Talk? Like this was just some argument about leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to pay a bill. I turned around slowly, trying to keep my composure, but when I met her eyes, I could see she was crying. Her face was red, her eyes puffy, and she looked guilty. Good. She should feel guilty. But that flicker of satisfaction was drowned out by the overwhelming wave of betrayal. Talk? I repeated, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. What the hell is there to talk about, Emma? I just walked in on you and in him. My voice cracked, the pain too much to hide. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To see that? In our home? She wiped at her eyes, sniffling, but didn't respond right away. I could see her trying to find the right words, but nothing she said could fix this. Nothing. It was a mistake, Tom. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please, it's not what you think, I swear, she choked out, but I wasn't buying it. The way she clung to the excuse of a mistake made me want to laugh bitterly. A mistake? That's what she was going to call this? How long, Emma? I demanded, my voice low and trembling with anger. How long have you been lying to me? How long has this been going on? She flinched like I'd slapped her, her eyes widening as if she hadn't expected the question. But I needed to know. I had to know how deep this betrayal ran. When she finally answered, her voice was so quiet, I barely heard it. 2 months, she whispered. 2 months. In that moment, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut all over again. For 2 months, the woman I loved had been living a double life. She had been lying to my face, sharing her body and her secrets with someone else while I had been blissfully unaware. I stared at her, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, and realized something terrifying. I didn't even know who my wife was anymore. 2 months? I repeated, the words feeling foreign as they left my mouth. It was like hearing a stranger's story, not my own life. For 2 months, she had been pretending, smiling at me, sharing meals, sleeping next to me at night, all while carrying this secret. Emma stood there, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. Her arms were wrapped around herself, as if she was trying to keep from falling apart. I wanted to feel some sort of pity for her, but all I felt was disgust. How could she stand there, asking for a conversation, after everything she'd done? The man, whoever he was still upstairs. I hadn't even bothered to ask his name. What did it matter? He was just another reminder of how broken my marriage was, how naive I'd been to think we were okay. Every fiber of my being wanted to storm back inside and throw him out of the house, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I was paralyzed between wanting to lash out and feeling completely defeated. Who is he? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It was like pulling teeth, every question a fresh wound, but I needed answers. I couldn't walk away without understanding just how deep her betrayal went. Emma hesitated. Her eyes darted away from mine, and she looked down at the ground as if ashamed. His name is David, she finally said, voice trembling. He's someone from work. Of course. It was always someone from work. That casual interaction that turns into something more. I felt my stomach turn as I imagined them, sitting in some office, their conversations slowly crossing boundaries I hadn't even known existed. I exhaled sharply, running my hands through my hair, trying to contain the rage bubbling beneath the surface. So what? I said, harsher than I intended. You met him at work, had a few laughs, and then just decided to throw away our marriage? Is that it? It wasn't like that, she pleaded, stepping closer, her hands shaking. It had happened. I don't know how to explain it. You don't know how to explain it? I laughed bitterly, the sound of it harsh in the quiet night. You don't accidentally end up in bed with someone for 2 months, Emma. You had plenty of chances to stop, to come clean, but you didn't. You chose this. Her face crumpled as if the weight of my words was finally sinking in. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, but I didn't feel any sympathy. How could I? She wasn't the victim here. I was. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely audible through her sobs. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I love you, Tom. I swear, I do. Those words, I love you, felt like salt in an open wound. If she loved me, how could she have done this? How could she have risked everything we had built together, everything we had shared? I shook my head, stepping back from her, needing space, air, anything to stop myself from drowning in this ocean of betrayal. Love? I spat out, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. If this is what love is to you, I don't want any part of it. She broke down then, sobbing uncontrollably, but her tears did nothing to soothe the storm raging inside me. I had no idea what to do next. There was no roadmap for this kind of pain. All I knew was that the life I thought I had was gone, and there was no going back. I watched her break down in front of me, tears streaming down her face, sobbing in the same way I used to comfort her after a long day. But this time, I couldn't move. My heart felt like a block of ice, my limbs heavy with the weight of betrayal. I wanted to care, to reach out and wipe her tears like I always had, but I just couldn't find it in me. The part of me that loved her, that cherished her, was buried too deep under the rubble of what she had done. Emma's cries echoed through the night, but they barely reached me. I was lost in my own thoughts, struggling to comprehend how we had ended up here. A part of me wanted to ask her more, to find out exactly when this had started, how it had grown into what I'd witnessed today. But another part of me knew that the answers wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. She had taken something from me, something I didn't even realize was so fragile, my trust. I had given it freely, never doubting her loyalty, her love, and now it was shattered, scattered like pieces of glass too broken to ever be whole again. And no amount of words, no amount of tears, would change that. I need space, I finally muttered, turning away from her. I can't do this right now. Tom, please, she called after me, her voice cracking, desperate. Don't leave. We can talk. We can figure this out. But I was already walking, heading toward the street, away from the house, away from her. My footsteps were heavy, but my mind was buzzing, like I was trapped in some surreal nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay there. I couldn't be near her, near that house, near the man still upstairs. Every second in that space was suffocating me. I needed to breathe, needed to clear my head before I lost control. As I walked, the streetlights flickered above, casting long shadows. My hands were still shaking, and I stuffed them into my pockets, trying to stop the trembling. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, like I didn't recognize the life I was living anymore. How had this happened? How had I missed all the signs? 2 months. For 2 months, she had been sneaking around, lying to my face, and I had been none the wiser. I had been living in this bubble, believing we were okay, that whatever problems we had were normal. But clearly, I had been wrong. I walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, my mind replaying every interaction over the past few months, trying to see if there had been hints, if I could have stopped this before it spiraled out of control. But no matter how hard I thought, I couldn't pinpoint a single moment when I could have known. She had hidden it well, too well. Eventually, my legs gave out, and I found myself sitting on a curb, head in my hands, staring at the pavement. The world felt impossibly heavy, like everything I had built was crumbling around me, and I had no idea how to stop it. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of everything. The sky had darkened completely by the time I heard footsteps approaching. For a second, I thought it was Emma, maybe following me, hoping to talk. But when I looked up, I saw it was my neighbor, Steve, jogging by on his nightly run. He slowed down when he saw me sitting there, concern etched on his face. Tom? You okay, man? I tried to force a smile, but I knew it didn't reach my eyes. Yeah, I lied, my voice hoarse. Just thinking. Steve looked like he wanted to press further, but thankfully, he didn't. Instead, he nodded and resumed his jog, leaving me alone with my thoughts. As I sat there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, staring at the screen. It was a text from Emma, short and simple. Please come home. We need to talk. I read the message several times, my stomach turning. The thought of going back there, of facing her, made my skin crawl. But I couldn't avoid this forever, could I? I had to confront it eventually. I stood up, my body aching from sitting on the cold curb for too long, and started walking again. But this time I headed home. My mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense, all of them tangled together like a mess I couldn't unravel. When I reached the front door, I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The house was eerily quiet. The man, David, apparently, was gone. Emma was sitting on the couch, clutching a tissue in her hand, her eyes red and swollen. You came back, she whispered, as if she didn't believe I would. I didn't respond, just stood there, staring at her, waiting for her to say something. Anything. I'm sorry, Tom, she started, her voice shaking. I don't even know how to begin to explain this. I messed up. I know I did. I let out a bitter laugh, leaning against the wall. That's one way to put it. She flinched at the sarcasm in my voice, but she didn't back down. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I need you to know that I love you. I never stopped loving you. Those words stung, cutting through the numbness I had wrapped around myself. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she had made a mistake, that this was something we could somehow overcome. But how could I trust her again? How do I believe anything you say, Emma? I asked, my voice breaking. You've been lying to me for 2 months. You slept with another man. How do I know this isn't just another lie? She broke down again, sobbing into her hands, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not this time. Not after what she had done. I don't know, she whispered between sobs. I don't know how to fix this. Neither did I. For the next few hours, we sat in silence, punctuated only by her sobs and my shallow breaths. Every few minutes, Emma would try to speak, but she'd falter, the weight of her guilt too heavy to carry. Meanwhile, I just sat there, numb to it all, wondering how we'd gotten here. I thought of the life we'd built, the vacations, the holidays, the moments that had once brought me so much joy. How could they now feel so hollow? I should have seen this coming, I muttered under my breath, more to myself than to her. I was replaying every moment from the last few months, scrutinizing them for the smallest of red flags. Her late nights at work, her sudden secrecy with her phone, her growing distance. All the signs were there, but I was too blind to connect the dots. Or maybe I just didn't want to. Emma raised her head slightly, eyes puffy and filled with remorse. Tom, it's not your fault. I wanted to scream. How could she say that? Of course it was my fault. If I'd been a better husband, if I had paid more attention, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Maybe she wouldn't have sought comfort in another man's arms. But instead of yelling, I just sighed, the exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster washing over me. I don't even know where to go from here, Emma. How do we fix this? Can we fix this? She was silent, her eyes downcast. That silence spoke louder than any answer she could have given. I knew she didn't have the answers. Neither of us did. After what felt like an eternity, I finally stood up, feeling the weight of the night crushing down on me. I need some time. I need to think. Without waiting for her response, I headed upstairs to our guest room, shutting the door behind me. It wasn't just physical space I needed, it was emotional distance. My mind was a mess, and I needed clarity before I made any decisions. I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible, not with the whirlwind of emotions tearing me apart inside. How was I supposed to navigate this? I loved her, but could I ever forgive her? Could I ever trust her again? The questions raced through my head, each one more suffocating than the last. And beneath it all was the lingering fear that no matter what I decided, nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, went through the motions, but my mind was a million miles away. I couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes before my thoughts drifted back to that night. The betrayal, the lies, the hurt. Emma tried to give me space, though I could tell it was killing her. She texted me constantly, asking if we could talk, if I was okay, if there was any way to fix this. But I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't ready to confront the wreckage of our marriage. I spent my nights in the guest room, a constant reminder of the distance between us, both physically and emotionally. We barely spoke. Every interaction was strained, awkward. I avoided her as much as possible, not wanting to see the guilt in her eyes, the tears that seemed to be a permanent fixture on her face. But even as I avoided her, I couldn't escape the memories. Everywhere I looked in the house, I saw reminders of our life together. The photos on the walls, the furniture we picked out, the little knickknacks we'd collected over the years. All of it felt tainted now, stained by her betrayal. I tried to think about what I wanted, what was best for me. Was this something we could work through? Could I forgive her? Part of me wanted to try, to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could get past this. But another part of me, the part that was still reeling from the hurt, was screaming that it was impossible, that I would never be able to look at her the same way again. One night, after yet another sleepless stretch, I found myself staring at our wedding photo. We looked so happy back then, so full of hope for the future. But now, that moment felt like a cruel joke. How had we gone from that to this? I didn't know what the right answer was. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in this limbo. It was a Thursday night when I finally broke down and called my best friend, Mike. He'd been texting me for days, sensing something was off, but I hadn't responded. I didn't know how to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone that the life you've been living is a lie? But now, I needed someone to talk to. Someone who wasn't Emma. When he picked up, his voice was filled with concern. Tom? What's going on, man? You've been MIA for days. I hesitated for a moment, not sure how to start. But once the words started coming, I couldn't stop. I told him everything. How I'd walked in on Emma, the affair, the lies, the 2 months of betrayal. By the time I was done, I was pacing around the room, my heart racing, as if I'd just relived the entire nightmare. Mike was silent for a moment, letting it all sink in. Jesus, Tom. I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry, man. I don't even know what to do, Mike. Part of me still loves her, but another part of me, I don't know if I can ever forgive her. Mike sighed on the other end of the line. You don't have to decide right now, you know? Take your time. Figure out what you need. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, I feel lost. I'm here for you, man. Whatever you need. We talked for a while longer, and for the first time in days, I felt a little bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. I still didn't have any answers, but at least I wasn't alone in this. The days dragged on, and the emotional distance between Emma and me only grew. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal in her eyes, and it became harder and harder to imagine a future where we could move past this. I knew she was trying, that she was desperate to make amends, but I wasn't ready to let her. One evening, after yet another tense, silent dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of it all, the constant pressure of pretending everything was okay, finally broke me. I can't do this, I blurted out, pushing my plate away. My voice was shaky, and I could feel the tears threatening to spill over. I can't live like this, Emma. It's too much. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic. Tom, please, we can work through this. I know we can. But I shook my head, standing up from the table. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Every time I look at you, all I see is what you did. I don't know how to get past that. Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'll do anything, Tom. Anything to fix this. Please, just give me a chance. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that there was still hope for us. But in that moment, all I felt was exhaustion. I was tired of the hurt, tired of the lies, tired of pretending that things could ever go back to the way they were. I need space, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Real space. I think you should go stay with your sister for a while. Emma's sobs grew louder, but I didn't back down. I couldn't. I needed to breathe, to figure out what I really wanted. And I couldn't do that with her around, reminding me of the pain every second of every day. Reluctantly, she nodded, wiping her tears away. Okay, she whispered. I'll go. As she packed her bags and left the house, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the comforting quiet I had once loved. It was an emptiness, a hollow echo of the life I had thought was real. The days without Emma were both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, I didn't have to see her, didn't have to relive the betrayal every time I looked at her. But on the other hand, the silence was suffocating. Without her, the house felt cold and empty, a constant reminder of what had been lost. I threw myself into work, hoping that the distractions would keep my mind off everything. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, my thoughts always drifted back to her, to the affair, to the life we had shared and the life we had lost. I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild. Maybe time apart would give us the space we needed to heal, to find our way back to each other. But every time I considered it, the doubts crept back in. Could I really forgive her? Could I really trust her again? One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring at my phone. My fingers hovered over Emma's contact, tempted to call her, to hear her voice, to see if she was okay. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too scared of what I might feel, too scared of reopening the wound that had barely begun to heal. Instead, I sat there in the silence, the weight of indecision pressing down on me like a boulder. I didn't know what I wanted, and that uncertainty was slowly driving me mad. It was a Saturday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened the door and saw Emma standing there, my heart skipped a beat. She looked nervous, her hands fidgeting as she stood on the porch. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, but eventually stepped aside, letting her into the house. It felt strange having her back here, in the place that had once been ours. The tension was thick in the air as we stood in the living room, neither of us knowing what to say. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice shaky. "About us. About everything. And I just need to know if there's any chance at all that we can fix this. I swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in my chest. Emma, I don't know, I admitted. I don't know if I can get past what you did. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I understand, but I want to fight for us, Tom. I love you. I made a horrible mistake, but I don't want to lose you. I stared at her, torn between the love I still felt for her and the pain that hadn't faded. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that there was still hope. But trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been shattered. I need time, I finally said. I don't know what the future holds, but I need time to figure things out. She nodded, wiping her tears. Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting if you decide we can try again. The following weeks were some of the hardest of my life. I went back and forth in my mind, weighing the love I had for Emma against the hurt she had caused. Some days, I thought I could forgive her, that we could work through this. Other days, the pain was too much, and I couldn't imagine ever trusting her again. I talked to friends, to family, trying to get advice, but no one had the answers. It was my decision, and mine alone. Finally, after weeks of agonizing over it, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. I needed to move forward, one way or another. I called Emma and asked her to meet me at the house. When she arrived, I could see the nervousness in her eyes, the hope mixed with fear. I've thought a lot about everything, I began, my voice steady, and I've come to a decision. She held her breath, waiting for my next words. I love you, Emma. I always will. But I can't forget what you did. I can't live with that betrayal hanging over us. I don't think I can ever trust you the way I used to. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Tom, please. I'm sorry, I interrupted gently, but I think it's best if we go our separate ways. Her sobs filled the room, but I stood firm. This was the hardest decision I had ever made, but I knew it was the right one. We couldn't fix what was broken. Some things just couldn't be mended. In the months that followed, I slowly began to rebuild my life. Emma and I finalized our separation, and though it was painful, there was a sense of relief in finally closing that chapter. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the loneliness hit hard, when I missed her, despite everything. But I knew that I had made the right decision. I leaned on my friends, threw myself into work, and slowly, the pieces of my shattered life began to come back together. The trust one had lost, the love that had been betrayed. It all still hurt, but the pain dulled with time. I learned to find happiness in the little things again. Weekend trips, quiet moments with friends, the simple pleasure of a good book. I wasn't the same person I had been before Emma's betrayal, but in a way, I was stronger. I knew now that I could survive even the deepest of heartbreaks. One day, as I sat in my now empty house, I realized that I had finally found peace. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was mine, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move forward, to let go of the past, and to start anew.